A hush falls over an old Kentucky estate at dusk. The wooden porch creaks under the weight of memories, and the last rays of sun cast long shadows across the lawn. This is Blackwood Hall, Colonel Harlan Sanders' home. A grand white mansion that once brimmed with life, now standing quiet and still. In its silent rooms, you can almost hear the echoes of distant laughter, the clatter of pans in a busy kitchen, and the heavy sighs of a man who carried a lifetime of triumphs and tragedies. Tonight, a warm breeze stirs the curtains in an upstairs window. If you didn't know better, you might think it was the colonel himself passing by, a ghost in a white suit roaming the halls, pausing by the old oak desk where he used to pore over recipes and balance sheets. The air is thick with history here. It smells faintly of fried chicken and cigar smoke, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the aroma of a legend. Colonel Sanders. The world knows his face, the kindly eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the neat goatee, the string tie, the immaculate white suit, an icon smiling down from countless red and white buckets, a comforting grandfatherly figure promising warmth and good taste. But behind that folksy grin lies a story steeped in darkness and struggle, a tale far more complex than the cheerful mascot of a global franchise. This mansion holds that story. The floorboards remember the colonel's angry pacing on sleepless nights. The parlor remembers the quiet sobs muffled into handkerchief when nobody was watching. The kitchen remembers everything. The sizzle of hot oil, the furious tirades when a dish wasn't just right, the prayers uttered under his breath before each meal. Within these walls, Harlan Sanders lived not just the American dream of prosperity and fame, but also a very human saga of hardship, violence, heartbreak, and redemption. Our story begins long before Colonel Sanders was a colonel, or even a cook. To understand the man who would build an empire from 11 herbs and spices, we must travel back to a small farm in Indiana at the dawn of the 20th century. It's the year 1895, a sweltering summer day. Inside a modest farmhouse, a 5-year-old boy stands on a stool by the stove, stirring a pot of simmering beans. The boy's name is Harlan, not yet a colonel, just a child with serious gray eyes balancing on tiptoe to reach the stovetop. He is cooking dinner for his younger brother and baby sister. His mother is out working, and there is no one else to put food on the table. Just a few months earlier, little Harlan's life had changed forever. One moment he was a carefree child trailing behind his father on the family's 8-acre farm, watching the gentleman tend the animals and till the soil. The next moment, that security was gone. Harlan's father came home feverish and in pain, a shattered leg from an accident leading to a stubborn infection that stole the life from him day by day. When Harlan was just 5 years old, his father died, leaving the boy's mother a young widow with 3 children to feed and no income to feed them. At an age when most children could barely dress themselves, Harlan had to learn to cook and care for his siblings. To make it, he left school after the 6th grade and took on the responsibilities of a grown man while still a child. In the dim light of dawn, he would crack eggs into a skillet, stir milk into cornbread batter, and fry up whatever meat he could find, if there was any at all. Standing at that stove, he discovered something. He had a knack for cooking. The aromas of country ham, skillet-fried chicken, and stewed greens became intimately familiar. On one chilly evening, with their mother still away working and supper time long past, Harlan's little brother and sister tugged at his shirt, their eyes wide with hunger. Determined not to let them go to bed empty, Harlan scrounged together what meager supplies they had, a scoop of cornmeal, a dab of lard, 2 eggs from the backyard coop, and set to work. Standing on tiptoe, he lit the stove and mixed the ingredients as best he could, humming a lullaby to keep the younger ones calm. The kitchen filled with the warm, comforting scent of frying hoe cakes. He served the simple meal, essentially cornmeal pancakes, to his siblings on tin plates. The children's cries turned to soft sniffles as they gobbled up the warm bites. In that moment, young Harlan realized the power of a good meal, how a bit of creativity and care could turn near nothing into something that soothed an empty belly and a worried heart. It was a lesson he never forgot. Granted, cooking was only one of Harlan's many chores. When he wasn't minding the stove or washing up, he was out in the fields trying to scrape together food. Neighbors might drop off a sack of corn, or he'd forage wild berries and edible greens along the fence rows. Often, he and his siblings went hungry until Harlan could fix something to eat. Hunger, the gnawing anxiety of not knowing where the next meal would come from, became an early companion. It was a fear he would never quite shake, even decades later, when money and food were plenty. Perhaps it was that childhood hunger that drove him relentlessly in later years, an engine of determination to ensure that no one who came to his table would ever leave unsatisfied. By the time he was 7, Harlan got his first job working for a neighboring farmer, laboring from sunup to sundown for a few pennies and maybe some leftover food to bring home. He was small but stubborn, sweating under the summer sun, doing a man's work before he'd even lost all his baby teeth. The farm chores hardened him, physically and mentally. By 10, he was plowing fields behind a mule, arms aching, sunburn raw on his neck, but he refused to quit because his family needed every bit of help. When Harlan was around 12, his mother Margaret remarried, hoping to give her children a stable home again. But stability was not what arrived. Harlan's stepfather was a stern man named Edward, and the boy and his new guardian quickly fell into conflict. Perhaps young Harlan had grown too independent from years of running the household, or perhaps Edward resented raising children that weren't his own. Either way, home was no longer a refuge for Harlan. The tension at home escalated into shouting matches and reportedly even physical confrontations. One day, after a particularly bitter quarrel, Harlan decided he'd had enough. Picture a dusty Indiana road at dawn. A young boy, stocky strong for his age, with a stubborn set to his jaw, walking away from a small farmhouse, an overstuffed burlap sack slung over his shoulder. The sky is tinged pink, birds just stirring. He doesn't look back. At 13 years old, Harlan Sanders left home to strike out on his own. He had barely a 6th-grade education, a head full of dreams, and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He found work as a farmhand for a while, sleeping in a barn loft, burning his keep with sweat and calloused hands. But a restless spirit was already churning inside him. Farm work was honest, but it wasn't enough for a boy who had glimpsed hardship and yearned for security. Harlan wanted more money than a farm could ever pay, more excitement than the flat Indiana fields could offer. And perhaps, if he were honest with himself, he wanted to prove something. That a poor, fatherless boy could rise above his circumstances. That he could become somebody important. So, at 16, he took a bold step. The year was 1906, and the United States Army was recruiting young men for service overseas. Never mind that Harlan was too young. He was big for his age, tall and sturdily built, and could pass for an older teenager. When a recruiter asked his age, Harlan simply lied. With a quick pen stroke, 15-year-old Harlan became 18, old enough to enlist and see the world beyond Indiana. A few months later, Private Harlan Sanders found himself in a crisp uniform under the harsh Caribbean sun. He had joined the U.S. Army and was sent to Cuba, though by then the Spanish-American War was over, and there would be no battles for him to fight. Instead, he spent his short military stint performing mundane duties in the Quartermaster Corps, managing supplies and occasionally tending mules. It wasn't glory, but it paid a soldier's wage and gave him a taste of life far from home. At night, he would lie in his bunk listening to the rustle of palm trees outside and the distant sounds of Havana's streets, wondering what future might lie ahead. The Army discharged Harlan less than a year later, and by 1907 he was back in the States, honorably discharged, with a bit of swagger from being a veteran at only 16. He'd seen Havana's bustling markets and savored rich Cuban coffee, and he wasn't about to return quietly to the plow. He drifted through the next few years like a tumbleweed, blown by the winds of opportunity and misfortune. He worked as a streetcar conductor in New Albany, Indiana, collecting fares and making change as he steered a clattering trolley through town. For the first time, he wore a uniform and cap that made him feel like a somebody, at least in the eyes of the passengers. It was on that streetcar that he met a young woman named Josephine King. She was quiet and steady, with kind eyes, the sort of girl who might have tempered Harlan's restlessness. They fell in love in the fits and starts of youthful courtship, shy glances on Sunday walks, perhaps a picnic or two by the Ohio River. In 1909, when Harlan was 18 and Josephine 21, they married in a simple ceremony. He wore his best suit. She wore a modest white dress. They were hopeful, ready to build something together. Marriage might have settled some men, but Harlan still had wanderlust in his blood and a fierce desire to find his calling. The new couple moved south to Alabama, chasing a job opportunity on the railroad. Harlan became a fireman on the Illinois Central Railroad, not fighting fires, but literally feeding the fires of the locomotive, shoveling coal into the roaring engine. It was dirty, blistering work. Josephine set up a tiny home near the rail yard and soon gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Margaret. Harland held his baby girl in his arms and swore he would give her a better childhood than his own, one without hunger, without chaos, without pain. It was a promise he meant with all his heart. But life had a way of testing him. As trains thundered down the lines, Harland's own life barreled forward on an unpredictable track. By day he labored on the railroad, face smeared with soot, muscles hardened by swinging the coal shovel. By night, surprisingly, he did something that few would have expected from a sixth-grade dropout. He studied the law. After long shifts he would dust off the coal, light a lamp and open correspondence coursebooks from LaSalle Extension University. Perhaps in those musty pages of legalese he saw a path to transform himself from a manual laborer into a respected professional, a lawyer, a man people might call Sir. Incredibly, after several years of self-study, Harland passed an informal law exam that allowed him to practice in Arkansas. By 1915 he had reinvented himself once again, now as Attorney H. D. Sanders, practicing law in Little Justice of the Peace Courts, Josephine and their by now 2 children, Margaret and a son, Harland Jr., moved with him to Little Rock. For a short time it seemed the tide was turning. Sanders had a quick mind and a golden tongue for arguing. He built up a modest practice handling wills, property disputes, and the occasional barroom brawl case. Clients started calling him Colonel in jest, impressed by his Southern demeanor, though he hadn't yet earned the title officially. Wearing a suit instead of overalls, Harland Sanders finally felt he was climbing the social ladder he'd been clinging to for years, but the demons that drove him were not easily tamed. Harland had always been headstrong, proud, and quick to anger, traits that served him well in fistfights and hardscrabble dealings, but betrayed him in polite society. The end of his law career came as swiftly as a gavel's rap. In the spring of 1916, Sanders took on a client named Mr. Chipley, Scott, who was in trouble with a loan shark. It was a small-time case, the kind that shouldn't have made headlines, but when the case went against them, Sanders found his legal fee in jeopardy. The court ordered Scott's wages garnished to pay the loan shark, leaving nothing for the attorney. Not one to be cheated, Sanders quietly arranged for a lien on Scott's wages to secure his payment, effectively cutting in line ahead of the loan shark. When Scott discovered this end run, he was furious. The next time he saw Sanders in that cramped courthouse, tempers flared, sharp words echoed off the wooden walls. Scott, feeling betrayed, lunged and threw a punch at Sanders right in the courtroom. The blow caught Harland on the jaw, and all hell broke loose. Rage exploded within the colonel. He wasn't about to be walloped by a client, right or wrong. In a flash, Sanders snatched up a nearby chair. Witnesses would later recall the image of Harland Sanders, normally so controlled in court, wielding that chair above his head, ready to bring it crashing down on the hapless client. Before he could, deputies tackled both men, ending the brawl, but the damage was done. The respectable veneer of Attorney Sanders was shattered in the eyes of the town. News of the courtroom melee spread, and the Little Rock legal community shunned Sanders for his lack of self-control. Facing potential disbarment and certainly loss of clientele, Harland prudently and angrily left town. He packed up his family and departed Little Rock in disgrace. Once more, Josephine returned to her parents' home with the children, while Harland roamed, trying to pick up the pieces of his professional life. It was a low point, perhaps the lowest in Sanders' life up to that time. He was pushing 30, with a wife and 3 kids. A third child, little Mildred, had been born in 1919, depending on him, and he had little to show for all his efforts. He had tasted success, but now he was right back where he started, maybe even worse, unemployed, humiliated, and directionless, living under his mother's roof in Henryville, Indiana. One humid summer evening, back at that Indiana farmhouse, Harland sat on the porch with his head in his hands. Crickets chirped in the long grass. The smell of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air. Inside, his mother fussed over the children, trying to maintain some normalcy in a crowded, multi-generational household. Harland stared out into the darkness. In his hand, he held a letter, its paper creased and sweat-stained from being folded and unfolded anxiously. It was from Josephine's brother, and it cut deeper than any courtroom insult could. "Josie's at home with her folks where she ought to be," the letter read. "She had no business marrying a no-good fellow like you who can't hold a job." Each word was a lash, and Harland felt them acutely. No good fellow. Can't hold a job. The judgment stung because, deep down, he feared it might be true. All his life he had been scrambling, working any angle, grabbing at any opportunity, fighting to carve out a piece of something, and yet stability seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. Shame coursed through him as he reread the letter by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Shame and a spark of fury. Alone on that porch, Harlan's hands trembled as he folded the letter one last time. He thought of his children, who'd been shuttled back to Alabama, and something in him snapped. According to family lore, in his humiliation and desperation, Sanders even considered an unthinkable act, kidnapping his own kids from his in-laws. The plan was half-baked and rash, born of panic. He would hide in the woods near the King family home and wait for an opportunity when little Margaret, Harlan Jr., and baby Mildred were playing outside. Then he'd scoop them up, hop a train, and vanish to start fresh somewhere far away, children in tow. For hours one night, Harlan crouched among the trees, mosquitoes whining in his ears, watching the soft glow of the house's windows. But the children never appeared unattended. As the night deepened, the outrageousness of his plan slowly dawned on him. He realized he couldn't do that to his kids, or to Josephine, whatever anger lay between them. Defeated, Harlan emerged from the shadows and knocked on the door. We can imagine Josephine opening it, her face a mixture of surprise and sorrow. Harlan likely apologized, or something near enough. And for a time, they reached an uneasy truce. Josephine and the children agreed to come back to him once he found a stable situation. It was a second chance, though it would prove temporary. Harlan needed to rebuild yet again. And rebuild he did, this time on the foundations of a humble ferry boat. In 1920, with sheer persuasiveness, Sanders convinced a few investors to back him in starting a ferry service across the Ohio River between Kentucky and Indiana. The ferry was an instant success, providing a vital link for commuters and travelers. Finally, he had a business that worked. Harlan's confidence returned. He sold his share of the ferry company a couple years later for around $22,000, a small fortune at the time, and over $250,000 in today's dollars. With that money in hand, he dived into a new venture manufacturing acetylene lamps. For a moment it looked like Harlan Sanders was on the verge of becoming a bona fide businessman. He had a product, a workforce, and a burgeoning market. Rural areas not yet electrified needed lamps. But fate, as ever, had other ideas. Just as the lamp business got going, electric companies like Delco started extending power lines and selling electric lamps on easy credit. Harlan's lamps became obsolete almost overnight. The venture collapsed, taking his ferry windfall with it. By the mid-1920s, Sanders was on the move again, chasing job after job like a man perpetually one step behind fortune. He worked as a salesman for Michelin tires in Kentucky, but lost that job when the company closed its plant. He peddled life insurance in Jeffersonville, but his defiant streak got him fired for insubordination. He couldn't stomach the pushy sales tactics the company demanded. He moved to Louisville and took a sales job with another insurance firm, only to leave after a quarrel with a supervisor. His resume looked less like a career and more like an inventory of odd jobs and near misses. Now into his late 30s, hair beginning to gray at the temples, Harlan Sanders felt time creeping up on him. He had a family to feed, a wife whose patience must have been worn paper thin, and a litany of failures weighing on his mind. And yet, through it all, one thing never failed him. He could cook. In the darkest times, when money was low and spirits even lower, Sanders found solace in the kitchen. A skillet of fried chicken, a pan of buttermilk biscuits, a pot of green beans seasoned with a ham hock. These were things he could still control, recipes that reliably produced comfort and a full belly no matter how empty his pockets were. Perhaps it was inevitable that cooking would finally become Sanders' salvation. The stage was being set for a new chapter, one that would start at a dusty little service station in Corbin, Kentucky, and lead, eventually, to the mansion where our story began. But that chapter would have its own darkness, and it would propel Harlan Sanders from a struggling middle-aged man into an icon, albeit one with secrets hidden behind his genteel smile. It's 1930. America is sinking into the Great Depression, with breadlines in the cities and desperation in the countryside. In the Appalachian foothills of southeastern Kentucky, at a crossroads near the town of Corbin, an old Shell oil service station stands along U.S. Route 25. The station's new operator is none other than Harlan Sanders, now 40 years old. Life has knocked him down again and again, but it hasn't broken him. With Shell offering him the station rent-free in exchange for a cut of sales, Sanders sees a chance to finally plant roots and build something lasting. Corbin in the 1930s is a rough, hardscrabble place. A coal country town where travelers stop on their way south and locals scrape by as they can. Harlan moves Josephine and the children, now teenagers, into quarters attached to the station. He pumps gas by day and tinkers with cars for extra coin. But remembering how food had always drawn people in, he also sets up a small dining area in a room adjacent to the station's office. There, on a few makeshift tables covered in oilcloth, he serves home-cooked meals to truckers and weary motorists. He fries up chicken in an iron skillet, bakes country ham, boils turnip greens, and makes flaky biscuits that remind travelers of home. With each satisfied customer, word spreads. There's a fellow at the Corbin Crossroads who can fix your car, fill your tank, and fill your belly too, all in one stop. For Harlan, it feels like pieces are finally coming together. He's in his element, bustling from gas pump to kitchen and back again, ladling rich cream gravy over mashed potatoes 1 minute, then checking the oil and tires on a Ford Model A the next. Josephine helps out in the kitchen, and with cleaning the cabins he's added out back for overnight guests. The strains of their past still linger, but they push through with a shared purpose. On the surface, they maintain a semblance of partnership, for the sake of the business, if not for love. Yet prosperity, however modest, breeds competition. Across town, another gas station owner watches Sanders' growing success with envy. His name is Matt Stewart, and he runs the Standard Oil station just down the road. Stewart also serves food at his place, and he's none too pleased that motorists are flocking to Sanders' establishment, lured by the promise of sizzling steaks and fried chicken, boldly advertised on a sign by the highway. In these lean times, every customer counts, and Stewart feels each one slipping away to Sanders like a personal affront. At first, the rivalry simmers quietly. A few glaring looks at the town barbershop, maybe a snide comment passed via mutual acquaintances, but Stewart doesn't stay quiet for long. One gray morning, Sanders steps outside to check his sign by the road and finds it ruined. Someone has sloshed thick paint across the lettering, completely obscuring the directions to his station. Harlan's blood boils. He knows exactly who is to blame, but he restrains himself. At first, he repaints the sign, brighter and bolder than before. It's a long day's work, but by evening, Sanders Court Gas and Good Eats is legible again to any passing car. Not a week later, Harlan wakes to find the sign vandalized again, the same smear of paint. This time, he doesn't bother repainting immediately. Instead, he drives straight to Matt Stewart's station. It's early, dew still on the grass. Stewart is out front, paint on his hands, perhaps surprised to see Harlan pull up so soon. Sanders climbs out of his car, face flushed with anger. "I know what you're up to, Matt," Harlan growls, his fists clenched at his sides. Stewart feigns innocence, wiping his paint-stained hands on a rag. "Don't know what you're talking about," he replies coolly, but a smirk tugs at his lip. Harlan steps closer. He's a head taller than Stewart and built solid from years of labor. "You paint over my sign again," he says, voice low and deadly serious, "and I'll blow your goddamn head off." Stewart's smirk vanishes. The two men lock eyes in a tense silence. In these hills, such threats are not taken lightly, and both know it. Without another word, Harlan turns on his heel, gets back in his car, and drives off, knuckles white on the steering wheel. But whatever fear Sanders instilled in Stewart with that warning, it isn't enough. The feud escalates toward violence, like a lit fuse racing toward dynamite. Sure enough, one muggy afternoon shortly after, Sanders gets word from a customer. That sign of his is being defaced again, right now. Harlan's jaw sets. He won't let it stand this time. He quickly rounds up 2 of his employees, young men from Shell who are loyal to him, and grabs his shotgun. The 3 of them pile into a truck and speed off to catch Stewart red-handed. They find him atop a ladder by the roadside, brush in hand, thick black paint dripping from the freshly defaced sign. Sanders and his companions screech to a halt. Harlan leaps out with his shotgun leveled. "I warned you, you son of a..." Sanders roars. Things happen fast. Stewart scrambles down, yanking a pistol from his belt. One of Harlan's Shell colleagues, also armed, steps forward. For a heartbeat, the tableau holds. Guns drawn under the Kentucky sun, the scent of honeysuckle and gasoline in the air, and then, bang. The crack of a pistol shatters the silence. A muzzle flash from Stewart's gun cuts through the afternoon light. One of Sanders' men staggers backward and collapses, a red bloom spreading on his shirt. In the shock that follows, instinct takes over. Sanders fires his shotgun with a thunderous boom, and Stewart cries out, dropping his pistol as buckshot tears through his shoulder. Another shot from the remaining Shell man sends Stewart crumpling to the ground. A pall of gun smoke hangs in the air. Birds startle from the trees. Passing motorists skid to a stop, unsure whether they've stumbled into a robbery or a war zone. When the smoke clears, Harlan Sanders stands trembling but unharmed, his shotgun still warm in his hands. Matt Stewart lies on the roadside wounded and groaning. And one of Harlan's friends, a Shell employee who had come along to help, is sprawled lifeless in the dust, a bullet through his chest. Harlan rushes to his fallen friend, desperate and disbelieving. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A man was dead over some painted sign and a patch of asphalt. Sirens wail in the distance. The authorities arrive to a scene of carnage. Harlan and his remaining companions surrender their weapons. Witnesses and even Stewart, clutching his bleeding shoulder, attest that Stewart fired first. After a harrowing day of statements and an inquest, Sanders and his colleague are released, deemed to have acted in self-defense. Matt Stewart, however, is charged with murder for the death of the Shell employee. By the time the trial is over, Stewart is convicted and sent to prison. In a cruel twist of fate, Sanders' hot-headed rival is removed from the picture permanently, but at the cost of an innocent life. As Matt Stewart disappears behind bars, Harlan finds himself without his chief competitor. In one of life's cruel ironies, the deadly feud left Sanders as the last gas station restaurateur standing in the area. Trade at Sanders' station soon doubles. Travelers who might have had two choices now have one, and locals, out of curiosity or sympathy, come to see the man who survived a gunfight. Sanders accepts their patronage with a tight smile, but when he's alone, he's haunted by nightmares. The crack of the gun, the image of his friend crumpling to the ground, the awful weight of being partly responsible for a death. He had lost a loyal friend in the gunfight, and now fate would demand an even greater sacrifice. Not long after the shootout, in September 1932, Sanders' only son, 20-year-old Harlan Jr., died suddenly following a routine tonsil surgery. The colonel received the news like a punch to the gut. He dropped everything and rushed back to Indiana to lay his boy to rest. At the funeral, Harlan stood beside Josephine in a rare moment of unity, both parents shattered as they watched their son's casket lower into the ground. Losing a child is a pain unlike any other, and for all his toughness, the colonel wept openly that day, feeling a piece of himself buried along with his namesake. In his quiet moments afterward, perhaps he resolved that their shared name would not vanish. He would make Harlan Sanders known far and wide, so that his son's memory might echo in that legacy. By the mid-1930s, with Stewart gone, Sanders' business thrives. He expands the gas station eatery into a proper restaurant he grandly dubs Sanders Court and Cafe. He builds a handful of small motel cabins around the property to lodge travelers overnight. Harlan's home is now a bustling way station for two forecasting decks. Hour traffic. A neon sign buzzes out front promising clean rooms, hot meals, open all night. Inside, red checkered tablecloths adorn the dining tables, and the savory aroma of fried chicken wafts through the swinging kitchen door at all hours. In 1935, the governor of Kentucky recognizes Harlan's contribution to the state's travelers and its cuisine by naming him a Kentucky Colonel, an honorary title that makes him beam with pride. Sanders receives an ornate certificate, which he frames and hangs in the cafe where customers can see. The title tickles him. Perhaps it feels like validation at last, a taste of the respect he's craved. Friends jokingly begin to call him the Colonel. And Harlan, always one to appreciate showmanship, starts to play the part. He grows a neatly trimmed mustache and a little goatee to look more the Southern gentleman. He trades in his overalls for a smart double-breasted coat when greeting guests. One hot July day in 1939, a distinguished visitor steps into Sanders' cafe unannounced. He's a genteel fellow named Duncan Hines, a traveling food critic compiling a guidebook of America's best roadside eats. Yes, the same Duncan Hines whose name you might see on cake mix boxes today. Hines tries the fried chicken, the country ham, the piping hot biscuits slathered with butter. He notes the steady stream of customers and the clean, cozy cabins out back. Before leaving, he shakes Harlan's hand warmly and offers a nod of genuine approval. Not long after, Harlan flips open a copy of Hines's published guide, Adventures in Good Eating, and there in black and white is Sanders Court, praised as a very good place to stop en route to Cumberland Falls and the Great Smokies. Continuous 24-hour service, sizzling steaks, fried chicken, country ham, hot biscuits. Harlan's chest swells with pride. He shows Josephine and anyone else who listen. Such recognition in print brings a stream of new travelers to his doorstep. Suddenly, Folks from far and wide make detours just to sample the famous fried chicken in Corbin, Kentucky. For the first time in his life, Harlan Sanders is riding a wave of genuine success. But just when life seems to level out, fate strikes again with literal fire. It's a frigid evening in November 1939. The dinner rush has ended, and Harlan and his staff are cleaning up. A grease-slick rag in the kitchen catches a spark, perhaps from a stove left on, and within moments, flames leap up the walls. A waitress screams, and Harlan rushes to evacuate the customers and his family. They form a bucket brigade, flinging water at the inferno, but it's too late. The dry timber of the old roadhouse lights up like kindling. By midnight, Sanders Court and Cafe is reduced to charred rubble. Harlan stands in the cold, watching embers twirl into the sky, his life's work seemingly turned to ash. It's a devastating setback, tempered only by the relief that no one was hurt. Come morning, the Colonel, as we can now rightfully call him, does what he's always done. He rolls up his sleeves and starts again. He borrows money, contacts suppliers, and rebuilds Sanders Court from the ground up. By mid-1940, a new and improved Sanders Court and Cafe stands on the old site, this time with a 140-seat restaurant, more motel rooms, and a modern kitchen gleaming with stainless steel. In this kitchen, Harlan perfects what will become his claim to fame: pressure-fried chicken. Traditional fried chicken took nearly half an hour to cook per order, too slow for the growing crowds, but using a heavy-duty pressure cooker, a relatively new invention in those days, Sanders experiments until he can fry chicken in about 10 minutes without sacrificing flavor or texture. Even more importantly, he's been tweaking a special blend of seasonings, a secret recipe of herbs and spices that, when added to the flour, give his chicken a flavor like no other. He guards this recipe zealously, writing it down in code and mixing the spices himself to send to each new cook he hires. By late 1941, Sanders Court is busier than ever. The dining room full most nights, the motel often booked. But storm clouds gather globally. In December, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor thrusts America into World War II. Rationing hits hard. Gasoline and tires become precious commodities, choking off tourist traffic. Many young locals, including some of Harlan's best employees, enlist and ship out to war. Harlan, now in his early 50s, patriotically signs up for civilian service. He leaves Claudia Lettington, a smart, friendly waitress turned manager at the cafe, in charge of Sanders Court while he takes a job running cafeterias for defense workers in Tennessee, and later, in Seattle. For a couple of years, Harlan is once again far from his beloved kitchen, overseeing mass meal operations in support of the war effort. During these war years, the Sanders household undergoes a final, irrevocable change. Harlan's relationship with Josephine, long strained by decades of instability and his infidelity, for by now everyone knew Harlan's bond with Claudia was more than professional, reaches its breaking point. They quietly separate for good during the war. In 1942, Harlan sells off his Asheville motel, another venture impacted by wartime travel decline. And when he returns to Corbin after the war, Josephine is not by his side. In 1947, after nearly 38 years of marriage, Harlan and Josephine Sanders divorce. It's a sad end, though not a surprising one. Their children are grown, their lives long since diverged. Josephine returns to Alabama, and Harlan, a bachelor in his late 50s, promptly marries Claudia, the woman who had been his steady companion and rock throughout the Sanders Court days. At age 58, the Colonel says, "I do," once more, this time to someone who shares not just his heart but his passion for the business. Harlan and Claudia settle back in at Sanders Court and Cafe in the post-war years, determined to make up for lost time. The late 1940s and early 50s are boom years in America. Families are hitting the open road in record numbers, and Harlan's stop becomes more popular than ever. A new interstate highway system is on the horizon, but for now, U.S. Route 25 still funnels thousands of cars past his door. The Colonel, true to his adopted persona, is rarely seen without a tailored suit and his growing collection of Kentucky Colonel bolo ties. By 1950, he's officially recommissioned as a Kentucky Colonel by the governor, a ceremonial gesture that he nonetheless relishes. Embracing the role fully, he even begins wearing an all-white suit in the summertime, a color choice that both battles the heat and makes him stand out like a showman. With Claudia's encouragement, Harlan devolves into a living mascot for his own establishment. He's the genial host, wandering table to ask diners if they're enjoying their meal, and woe betide the cook if anyone had a complaint. He regales customers with cleaned-up versions of his life stories, The shootout becomes a cautionary tale about the perils of pride. His early struggles become humorous anecdotes about the school of hard knocks. Always a natural entertainer, Harlan finds that wearing the persona of the Colonel suits him as well as the white suit itself. By 1952, Sanders Court and Cafe is at its zenith of local fame. And it's in that year that Harlan Sanders plants the seed of something far greater. The American landscape is changing. Drive-in restaurants and fast food are emerging to feed the car-happy public. Harlan realizes that as much as travelers love eating at his place, his reach is limited to those who come to Corbin. But what if his chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken he calls it proudly, could travel beyond Corbin? What if restaurants across the nation served his chicken under a common name? The idea of franchising a restaurant isn't entirely new, but it's far from common. Yet the Colonel, with his trademark vision, and perhaps a dash of desperation, since he's pushing 60 and not getting younger, decides it's the future. He tests the waters close to home, franchising his recipe to a restaurant in Florence, Kentucky. It's a modest start, but then he hears of a former colleague, Pete Harmon, running a successful restaurant all the way out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Taking a deep breath and mustering his courage, the 62-year-old Colonel packs up his car with a few pressure cookers, a crate of spice mix, and an awful lot of hope. Legend has it that Sanders, hair now crisp white and matching mustache to boot, drives across the country to pitch his chicken to Pete Harmon. The journey is long and punctuated by stops at countless other restaurants along the way. In his trunk he carries everything he needs to demonstrate his craft, and he does so at every opportunity. He endures plenty of rejection, more than 1,000 no's, he'd later say with dramatic flourish, as many proprietors can't imagine paying a royalty to some stranger for a mere fried chicken recipe. Some laugh him out the door, others politely decline. But a few, after tasting what the Colonel cooks up, start thinking twice. So in 1952, in Salt Lake City, the world's first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise opens. Pete Harmon sees his sales triple with the addition of Harlan's chicken to his menu. Harmon and Sanders work out a handshake deal. For every chicken sold, Sanders would get a nickel, later raised to a dime. It doesn't sound like much, but a nickel from every chicken at dozens, then hundreds of restaurants adds up to a fortune. Back in Corbin, Harlan feels invigorated by this new direction. He's on the road more than ever, drumming up franchisees, teaching cooks the Sanders way. Claudia holds down the fort at Sanders Court, mixing and shipping out the proprietary blend of spices to new franchise locations. Harlan files for a patent on his pressure-frying technique and trademarks the phrase, "It's finger-lickin' good," a homespun slogan he coined to capture the messy delight of eating every last morsel of his chicken. But just as this expansion picks up steam, a looming threat appears, the new Interstate 75. When the planned route is revealed, Sanders is devastated to see it will bypass Corbin by miles. By 1955, the once busy highway outside Sanders Court is quiet, its traffic siphoned off by the faster interstate. Business plummets. At 65 years old, an age when most hard-working souls look to retire, Harlan Sanders faces the unthinkable. His restaurant, his pride and joy, can no longer sustain itself. With a heavy heart, he auctions off Sanders Court and Cafe, getting just enough to cover his debts. As he watches the new owner's sign go up and turns his back on the place he built from ashes, one might imagine Harlan blinking away tears. Everything he'd built in Kentucky was gone in a day. But if life had taught Harlan Sanders anything, it was how to start over. Now, with only his savings and a $105 a month Social Security check as safety, he turns his full attention to franchising. He's not about to fade away. In fact, his journey is just entering its most extraordinary phase. So in 1956 and 57, Colonel Sanders becomes an unlikely sort of traveling salesman, an old man in a white suit crisscrossing the country to sell his secret recipe. With his car loaded down by pressure cookers, bags of spice mix, and plenty of ambition, and often with Claudia by his side to handle paperwork and support, the Colonel knocks on diner doors from the Carolinas to California. He strides in, unmistakable in that white suit, now a bit rumpled from many miles on the road, and introduces himself. "I'm Colonel Sanders, and I've got something mighty fine to show you." Restaurateurs raise their eyebrows at the strange sight of this elderly gentleman making such a pitch. Some think it's a joke, until he sets up in their kitchen and fries them a batch of chicken. Then skepticism melts faster than lard in a hot skillet. To be sure, it's not an easy sell. Many proprietors politely tell him that customers in their state won't care about Kentucky Fried Chicken, or that they've already got their own fried chicken recipe. Some days are nothing but rejection and long, lonely drives to the next town. Some nights, the Colonel can't even afford a motel. One autumn night in 1956, after another fruitless day of pitching his recipe, he pulls into a quiet rest area off an empty highway in Ohio. Too proud or too frugal to pay for a room when no deal was struck, he reclines the driver's seat of his Chevy. The night is cold. Harlan tugs his white jacket tighter over his chest as a blanket, watching his breath fog up the windshield. Perhaps he wonders if this crazy venture is a mistake, if an old man should simply accept retirement rather than chasing a dream across America. But with the first light of dawn, his resolve hardens again. He splashes water on his face at the rest stop sink, combs his white hair and mustache, and dons his string tie as smartly as ever. By sunrise, he's back on the highway, the pressure cooker rattling in the trunk, and a faint hope kindling in his chest. Maybe today, he murmurs to himself, maybe today I'll find the one who'll say yes. Eventually, his persistence pays off. One by one, diners, cafes, and restaurant owners sign on to become KFC franchisees. A truck stop in Tennessee, a lunch counter in Missouri, a drive-in in Texas. By 1960, Colonel Sanders has over 200 franchise agreements inked. Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets are popping up across the map, and his once modest regional brand is becoming a national presence. With this explosion of growth comes wealth like Harlan Sanders has never known. The nickels and dimes from each chicken turn into thousands of dollars a month. Suddenly, the Colonel, who spent his life scraping for every dollar, is flush with money in his 70s. In 1959, he and Claudia decide to invest in a new home and base of operations. They purchase a beautiful 5,000 square foot house on the outskirts of Shelbyville, Kentucky, the place we know as Blackwood Hall. This stately home, with its white columns and wraparound porch, is both a symbol of how far he's come and a practical headquarters for the rapidly expanding KFC enterprise. They move the company office into a building on the property. The spice shipments go out from Shelbyville now, and franchisees come here to meet the legendary Colonel in person. Imagine Harlan Sanders in those days, hosting would-be franchise owners in the parlor of Blackwood Hall, perhaps offering them sweet tea or a nip of bourbon as they sit beneath oil portraits and shelves of fine china. He's the picture of Southern hospitality, but when business talk starts, he's all seriousness. He lays out his terms, a nickel a chicken, unwavering adherence to his recipe and methods, and he peers over his glasses, gauging whether the person across from him has the gumption and quality to carry his brand. Many walk away charmed and impressed, clutching signed contracts that authorize them to plaster the Colonel's smiling face on a sign of their own. By 1963, Kentucky Fried Chicken has grown to over 600 franchises, one of the largest fast food operations in the country. Harlan Sanders, the scrappy boy turned old entrepreneur, has become something of a folk hero. He's traveled over 200,000 miles a year to promote KFC, often accompanied by a personal driver as he dozes in the back seat between stops. He's appeared on television shows, in magazine profiles, always in that now trademark white suit. He's become the living embodiment of his brand, more recognizable in many towns than the local mayor. Yet, even as his smiling caricature spins atop neon signs from Florida to Alaska, Harlan is feeling his age. The rapid expansion, while gratifying, is overwhelming him with its complexity. Running a corporate enterprise with warehouses, salaried executives, and international deals is far from the simple life of frying chicken and chatting with diners. Harlan's health isn't what it used to be either. Decades of stressful living and countless plates of fried food have taken their toll. And while the money is pouring in, he can't help but fret about the quality control. He can't personally check every franchise's gravy or chicken like he used to at the original cafe. He's entrusted much of that to others, and that thought nags at him. And so Colonel Sanders, who was never one to step away from a fight, makes a decision in 1964 that shocks those who know him. He decides to sell Kentucky Fried Chicken. At 73 years old, he's achieved a level of success he never imagined possible, but he knows he cannot carry it alone any further. The business has grown beyond an old couple operating out of a mansion. It needs fresh energy, youthful drive, and corporate acumen. On a crisp autumn day in 1964, in a Louisville boardroom far removed from the rustic charm of Blackwood Hall, Colonel Harlan Sanders sits at a polished table across from a young lawyer-turned-investor named John Y. Brown, Jr., and a financier named Jack Massey. They represent a group of investors eager to buy the booming franchise empire. The Colonel cuts an imposing figure even there. White suit impeccably clean, black string tie neatly knotted, his eyes sharp behind his glasses as he listens to the terms being laid out. They're offering $2 million, an astronomical sum for that era, in exchange for the Kentucky Fried Chicken Corporation, including all the franchising rights and the brand. As part of the deal, they insist that Harland remain the face of the company. A goodwill ambassador paid a lifetime salary to appear in commercials and at events. In effect, he will become the living symbol of KFC but no longer its owner. Harland's pen hovers over the contract. Perhaps his hand trembles a bit as he signs H.D. Sanders on that line. Perhaps a lump catches in his throat. This is his baby he's relinquishing. The name, the recipes, the image he built from the ground up. But he looks over at Claudia, and they both understand it's necessary. They've achieved more than they ever dreamed, and it's time to let professionals carry it onward. These new owners, Brown and Massey, are ambitious and smart. Brown is a charismatic 29-year-old who would one day become governor of Kentucky. Harland trusts that they will honor what he's created. And $2 million, plus a generous stipend for life, is not just a comfortable cushion. It's validation in cold, hard cash of the worth of his life's work. At first, the colonel takes to semi-retirement with gusto. With the sale money, he establishes the Colonel Harland Sanders Charitable Foundation and starts giving back. He donates sizable sums to hospitals, funding a children's wing in Ontario, where he had business ties through Canadian franchises, churches, and other charities. He finally buys a new car, a Cadillac no less, to replace the well-worn road warrior that carried him across the country. And he indulges in something he never had time for: travel purely for pleasure. He and Claudia tour Europe, dine in fine restaurants, where Harland can't help but peek into the kitchen or chat with the chef, and even make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But much of the Colonel's travel in those early post-sale years is still related to KFC. He remains the company's beloved ambassador. He might not run the day-to-day, but he's trotted out at grand openings of franchises everywhere from Indiana to Japan. Wherever he goes, he draws a crowd. When a new KFC opens in, say, Omaha or Montreal, you can bet Colonel Sanders will be there, cutting the ribbon, shaking hands, and posing for photographs with that iconic grin. In one city after another, people line up just to catch a glimpse of him. They treat him like a rock star, an old man in a white suit who somehow captures a nostalgic, genuine piece of Americana that resonates with everyone. Imagine him being mobbed by fans at a Tokyo KFC debut, the Japanese admirers bowing and flashing peace signs for photos with the jovial Colonel. It's thrilling and a bit surreal for him. Despite his newfound celebrity and wealth, Sanders is not immune to controversy. In 1968, during a turbulent era of American politics, he made a surprising foray into the political arena by lending his support to Alabama Governor George Wallace's presidential campaign. Wallace, notorious for his segregationist stance, even floated Colonel Sanders as a potential vice presidential running mate that year. The alliance never materialized. Wallace chose another, but the Colonel's public backing of such a divisive figure became an uncomfortable footnote in his story. It was largely glossed over in the family-friendly corporate lore, perhaps because it revealed that Sanders, for all his charm and hospitality, had his blind spots and loyalties rooted in an older Southern mindset. To his admirers and the KFC brand managers, it was a reminder that the beloved icon, like any other, was not without flaws or complexity. Yet, stepping back from day-to-day control does not come easily to Harland. He remains on the KFC board of directors in a nominal role, but as the company expands globally under its new leadership, he sees changes that unsettle him. The menu is tweaked, new products introduced, cost-cutting measures find their way into the operations. And though he is contractually the company's figurehead, his influence on actual decisions wanes with each passing year. By 1970, Kentucky Fried Chicken has become a public corporation, and soon after, Brown and Massey sell it to the food and spirits conglomerate Hublin Inc. for a hefty profit. Now KFC is in the hands of suits in Connecticut, who likely care more about quarterly earnings than Harland's old-fashioned notions of perfection. The Colonel, well into his 70s, suddenly finds himself on the outside looking in, and he doesn't like what he sees. He still travels a staggering 200,000 miles a year on behalf of KFC, visiting franchises around the globe as an honored guest. But behind the smiles and ceremonial ribbon cuttings, he's taking mental notes. If the gravy in one franchise is too bland, if the chicken's crust in another is subpar, Harland doesn't hesitate to speak up, loudly and publicly. He's like a wandering quality inspector, and many franchisees privately dread his surprise visits because if something isn't up to snuff, The Colonel will let you know with the force and variety of his swearing, as one executive later recalled. One change in particular sticks in his craw: the gravy. To Harland, gravy was always the soul of the meal. He used to brag that gravy's so good, it'll make you throw away the darn chicken and just eat the gravy. But the corporate chefs at Hublin, looking to streamline and cut costs, have altered the gravy recipe into something unrecognizable to him. A thin beige sauce made from a mix what Harland calls wallpaper paste. The franchisees have been instructed to use this easier method, and when Harland first tastes it, he is beside himself with disgust. In 1970, Harland and Claudia, now in their late 70s, take a trip to the Holy Land and are baptized together in the River Jordan. It's a deeply spiritual moment, a public affirmation of the faith that had quietly guided them, in Harland's case, sometimes more quietly than others, through years of adversity. Perhaps it's also a moment of seeking forgiveness. Harland had always maintained a belief in God, even if his vocabulary could be salty and his temper short. He befriends evangelists like Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell, finding kinship in their Southern upbringings and moral outlooks. After a lifetime of whirlwind and occasional moral compromises, the Colonel seems to be considering his legacy not just in business, but in the hereafter. But if the baptism cleansed his soul, it didn't wash away his feistiness. In the early 1970s, the Colonel grows increasingly vocal about his displeasure with KFC's direction. He publicly decries the new gravy, at one point telling a reporter it's horrible and that the crispy recipe the company introduced was nothing but a damn fried dough ball stuck on some chicken. Those kinds of quotes make for sensational headlines and major headaches for KFC's corporate PR team. In January 1974, Harland takes an extraordinary step. Feeling that Hublin is ruining the franchise's reputation, and by extension his own good name, he sues the parent company for $122 million. Yes, the man whose face is on the bucket sues his own brand. The charges? He alleges that Hublin misused his image, slapping the Colonel's smiling face on all kinds of products he never developed or approved. Rumors swirled of everything from extra crispy to a proposed line of pastries, which he found sacrilegious. He also claims the company is preventing him and Claudia from expanding their own side venture, a sit-down restaurant called Claudia Sanders' Dinner House that they opened in 1968 in Shelbyville. To the Colonel, this new restaurant was a passion project to honor Claudia, but to Hublin it looked like competition using the Sanders name. The lawsuit splits an already strained relationship straight down the middle. In one memorable scene during the 1974 legal proceedings, observers watch in amazement as 83-year-old Colonel Sanders arrives at the courthouse in Louisville to give a deposition. The press swarms on the steps, microphones jostling. The young reporter calls out, "Colonel, why are you taking KFC to court?" Harland pauses, resting on his cane, and with that familiar fire in his eye, drawls, "Because, son, they ain't making it the way it ought to be." A chuckle ripples through the crowd, but the Colonel's face remains stern. Inside, facing a panel of slick corporate attorneys in dark pinstripes, Sanders cuts an unusual figure in his cream-white attire, an old Kentucky gentleman stepping into the lion's den of modern corporate law. At a deposition table, the company lawyers attempt to needle him with questions, but Harland meets them with frank, unfiltered answers. During a break, one lawyer is overheard whispering that he's never heard such colorful profanity used in a formal proceeding. Apparently, the Colonel has spent a good portion of the deposition cussing up a storm as he described how the new gravy wasn't fit for a hog's slop bucket. And yet, there's respect in the attorney's voice. Harland Sanders, nearly 50 years older than everyone else in the room, commands attention by sheer force of personality. The legal battle is fierce but relatively brief. Neither side truly wants the negative publicity to drag out. By late 1974, they reach a settlement. The terms are somewhat anticlimactic. Hublin pays the Colonel $1 million, a decent sum but far less than what he sought, and agrees to let him continue operating Claudia Sanders' Dinner House so long as it doesn't explicitly compete with KFC. Harland, for his part, agrees to tone down the public outbursts and to officially stop plans of franchising the Colonel's Lady restaurant. Outwardly, both parties declare respect and mutual goodwill. Inwardly, Harland remains resentful that it came to this. "Imagine suing for the right to use your own name," he grumbles to friends. But even he knows that it's time to let the conflict rest. Hublin, in a rather petty countermove in 1975, had even briefly sued Sanders for libel after one of his more inflammatory gravy comments. "Sludge, with a wallpaper taste," he had said. That suit was dropped in embarrassment. Suing an 84-year-old folk hero over an opinion on gravy was not exactly sterling PR. After that, the uneasy truce settled in. The Colonel would continue to represent KFC publicly, and privately he would mostly hold his tongue when corporate decisions disagreed with him. The truth was, by the mid-1970s, Harlan Sanders had mellowed, at least a bit. His health began to decline. He had a painful gallbladder operation and wore a pacemaker. Yet he refused to slow down too much. He still donned his white suit and toured franchises here and abroad, delighting in the crowds and the adulation. He took particular pleasure in surprising new franchisees by showing up unannounced to inspect the kitchen. Imagine being a young manager in 1977, looking up from the fryer to see the Colonel himself peering at you. He would run a finger along a shelf to check for dust or sample a drumstick straight from the warmer and pronounce judgment with a pursed lip nod or a scowl. Most of the time he'd flash that grin and shake the employees' hands, encouraging them to keep up the good work. But if something truly displeased him, well, the employees would have a story of being chewed out by the Colonel to last a lifetime. Even after stepping back from the day-to-day fight, Harlan's persona grew larger than ever. By now he was more myth than man. KFC advertisements kept his image front and center, sometimes in cartoon form or with voice actors imitating his drawl. He was the lifeblood of their marketing, this avuncular southern gent who practically was fried chicken incarnate. In Japan, KFC became wildly popular for Christmas meals of all things, and the Colonel's statues outside the stores were beloved. Beloved a bit too much. In 1985, delirious fans of the Hanshin Tigers baseball team in Osaka, in a fit of celebration, grabbed a plastic Colonel statue from a KFC and chucked it into a river, thereafter blaming their team's subsequent losing streak on the curse of the Colonel, until the long-lost statue was finally recovered decades later. By 1980, Harlan Sanders is 89 years old and still a presence. He and Claudia have slowed down somewhat, enjoying quieter days at home in Blackwood Hall when they can. But he'll still put on the suit and attend the opening of a new KFC here and there, or cut the ribbon at a charity drive. The man simply doesn't know how to be idle. Yet no matter how indomitable one's spirit, time waits for no one. That year, Harlan is diagnosed with acute leukemia. It's advanced. The doctors gently tell him and Claudia there's not much to be done. True to form, the Colonel keeps up appearances as long as he can. In November 1980, just weeks before his death, he makes one last public visit to a KFC, appearing before a crowd in Louisville. He's thinner, a bit pale, but dressed to the nines and smiling, as always, as he greets admirers. Most in the crowd have no idea he's gravely ill. On December 16, 1980, Harlan David Sanders passes away at Jewish Hospital in Louisville. Pneumonia, aggravated by his weakened state, is the final cause. Claudia and a few family members are by his side. It is said that Harlan was conscious until near the end, and one imagines that as he drifted away, perhaps the aromas of a kitchen long past came to comfort him. The scent of biscuits in the oven, of black coffee, of chicken frying golden and crispy, all swirling warmly in memory as the world faded. Frankfurt's Capitol Rotunda saw thousands file past his flag-draped coffin, paying respects as if to a head of state. The funeral service at a Louisville seminary chapel drew over 500 attendees, including governors, movie stars, franchise owners, and ordinary fans alike. At a separate memorial in KFC's headquarters, his body lay in an open casket. More than 1,000 people, from executives in tailored suits to cooks still wearing flour-dusted aprons, came through to honor the man who had transformed their industry. Many wept openly. To them, Sanders wasn't just a logo or a corporate figure. He was a flesh-and-blood mentor and a legend, someone who had set an example of relentless hard work and unwavering standards. After the speeches and the prayers, Colonel Harlan Sanders was laid to rest in his adopted hometown's Cave Hill Cemetery, buried in his characteristic white suit and black Western string tie. In the hush of that graveyard, among the gently sloping hills, one could almost hear a voice on the wind saying, in that familiar warm drawl, "I've done my best. I hope you'll remember me kindly." His wife, Claudia, lived on for another 16 years. She spent them much as she'd spent her life, keeping busy with the restaurant. She sold Claudia Sanders' dinner house in the 1980s to new owners who pledged to uphold its traditions, and fiercely guarding the legacy of her beloved husband. Claudia died on December 31, 1996, at the age of 94. Closing the chapter on an era. By the time of Harlan's death, Kentucky Fried Chicken had exploded to some 6,000 outlets worldwide, with annual sales in the billions. Today, that empire only continues to grow, and the colonel's smiling face is still the centerpiece of its identity, a symbol recognized on streets from Beijing to London to Nairobi. And as KFC grew, so did the myth of the colonel. In ads and promotions after his death, he was sometimes portrayed by actors, some sincerely, some comically, and while audiences reacted with affection at seeing him again, others felt it was a bit irreverent, as if a sacred figure were being impersonated. But that's the double-edged sword of becoming a legend. Eventually, you belong to the world as much as to yourself. Yet within the walls of the mansion where Harland and Claudia spent their golden years, the real story, the dark, complicated human story, lingers. Blackwood Hall stands to this day as a monument to a uniquely American tale. Its rooms tell the story of a man who was complex and flawed, who could be generous and gentle one moment and cantankerous and hot-tempered the next. A man who turned a meager gas station kitchen into a global phenomenon, but found that immense success exacted a price in personal peace. Today, the property that was once Blackwood Hall has passed to new caretakers, but they still cherish the Sanders legacy. The old Claudia Sanders dinner house nearby continues to serve up hearty Southern meals to families, the aroma of fried chicken and yeast rolls still perfuming the Kentucky air, just as it did in the colonel's day. Tourists and history buffs occasionally stroll by the mansion, hoping for a peek or a photo, drawn by the legend of the white-suited man who lived there. In 2002, the Sanders estate itself once again made headlines. The Shelbyville property Blackwood Hall in the adjacent Claudia Sanders dinner house was put up for sale with an asking price of $9 million. Along with its 3 acres of land, the sprawling house and restaurant came a trove of relics from the colonel's life. His original Kentucky Colonel certificate, the very document he'd hung proudly on his wall, his well-worn Bible, pages annotated with his own handwriting, his gold money clip and wristwatch, even a personal letter from President Richard Nixon wishing the colonel a happy birthday. Collectors and entrepreneurs around the world perked up at the opportunity to own a piece of fast food history, to literally walk the halls where Harland and Claudia lived, to perhaps cook on the same stove where the colonel himself trained franchisees in the 1960s. But no matter who holds the deed, no matter what price the estate might fetch, one thing is certain: the true value of that property lies not in its brick and mortar, but in the stories and lessons soaked into its very timbers. Dusk settles once more over Blackwood Hall. In the growing darkness, the mansion seems alive with echoes. Through an upstairs window you might fancy seeing a silhouette, a man in a white suit gazing out over the gently swaying bluegrass fields. Inside, if you listen closely, you might hear the faint clink of china, the distant laughter from a long-ago dinner party, or the colonel's own booming guffaw from the parlor. They say a house is a living thing, and this house certainly feels alive with the spirit of its famous occupant. In the dining room, you can almost picture Colonel Sanders at the head of the table during a family meal, carving a roast, regaling dinner guests with one of his countless anecdotes, perhaps the one about shooting a man over a sign, eliciting gasps and laughter, punctuated by Claudia's gentle admonishment, "Now, Harland, don't scare our guests half to death." In the cozy den, imagine him in an armchair by the fireplace on a winter evening, spectacles perched on his nose as he reads the Bible or a book of Civil War history. He was, after all, a keen student of history, occasionally pausing to sip a cup of hot coffee. Claudia sits nearby knitting, the quiet partner who steadied his life's turbulence. He looks up and meets her eyes over the rim of his cup, and they share a silent understanding born of many decades and trials together. The house remembers quieter moments too, not just the grand stories, but the intimate ones. The muffled sound of the colonel's footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway on a sleepless night when he was worried about the business. The floorboards still carry the faint groove of where he trod. The distant creak of the screen door as he stepped onto the porch at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, lighting a cigarette and staring out into the starry Kentucky sky, wondering if selling the company had been the right choice or if he'd somehow let his creation slip away. The house heard the soft sobs he shed in 1932 when he returned from his son's funeral. Alone on that same porch, a handkerchief pressed to his eyes so no one would see the great colonel cry. But the walls also rejoice with memories of laughter. Colonel Sanders had a booming laugh that could shake the glass in the cabinets. He loved to play the role of Santa Claus at the Shelbyville orphanage every Christmas, using the mansion's phone to arrange deliveries of gifts and food, then coming home that night cheeks red from the cold and the joy. In this very house, he once hosted a group of Japanese KFC executives for dinner. They bowed deeply to him as though he were royalty, The Colonel, never one to miss a comedic beat, responded by adopting a ridiculously exaggerated southern drawl and offering them moonshine or sweet tea, whichever y'all prefer. Claudia nearly kicked him under the table, worried he might offend them. But when the translator relayed the joke, the guests erupted in laughter. The whole table roared for minutes, the cultural gap bridged by humor and humanity, a testament to Harlan's universal charm. The dark story of Colonel Sanders' estate isn't a ghost story in the traditional sense, but the ghosts are there. The ghosts of ambition and failure, of devotion and regret. They linger in the corners and corridors. In the quiet of a summer afternoon, perhaps the faint aroma of frying chicken still drifts through the kitchen, as if the house itself cannot forget the magic that was concocted there. And late at night, when the world is still, one might imagine Colonel Sanders' spirit taking a last slow walk through each room, reflecting on the incredible journey of his life. From a hungry boy scrambling to feed his siblings to an old man who fed the world, what a road he'd traveled. If you stand outside Blackwood Hall as the moon rises, you may see something. A lone figure on the porch, shadows stretching behind him. A man in an old-fashioned suit, looking out at the night. He raises a hand in a welcoming wave, ever the host, and for a split second you can almost hear him say, "Y'all come back now, you hear?" Then a blink, and he's gone, leaving only the rustle of the trees and the gentle chirp of crickets. The story of Colonel Harlan Sanders, the dark, the light, the failures, the triumphs, is etched into this Kentucky home. It's a story that reminds us how the American dream can be a winding road through both glory and heartbreak. The Colonel's mansion stands as a silent witness, its windows like eyes that have seen it all. The poverty of a fatherless child, the temper of a young firebrand, the determination of an entrepreneur, the arrogance and the humility, the love and the loss. As the lights in the mansion flicker off one by one, the legacy of Colonel Sanders endures. It endures in every KFC sign that bears his likeness, in every family that sits down to a bucket of his chicken and unknowingly partakes in a slice of his story. It endures in the cautionary lessons of how success can exact a price, and in the inspiring message that it's never too late to start again. Harlan Sanders, the Colonel, once said he had been a failure for half his life, but it wasn't how you start, it's how you finish. He finished as an icon, but one forged in the crucible of struggle. And here, at the Colonel's estate, that truth still resonates. The gentle Kentucky breeze whispers through the trees of Blackwood Hall, carrying with it the laughter, the curses, the prayers, and the dreams of the man who lived there. If you listen, truly listen, you might hear the Colonel's voice mingling with that breeze, telling us one last time that life is, indeed, finger-lickin' good, but it sure ain't easy. And that is the dark and human story behind the legend.